Great. Why don't you start us up here?
Okay, so we're here to talk about our 2019-2020 proposed goals, our priority objectives, and our proposed budget. And going through that discussion will be Sujata Jain, our ADO for Finance, and our CFO. Sujata.
Thank you, Wayne. Good afternoon, Dr. Burke. Good afternoon, members of the board. This is a presentation of our goals and priority objectives and general fund budget and Rec 3 fees, proposed Rec 3 fees for 1920. So first, we'll just go through the mission statement. We have 3 goals and 19 objectives. Our mission statement is to clean the air and protect the health of all residents in the South Coast Air District through practical and innovative strategies. We have 3 goals: achieve clean air standards, enhance public education, and ensure equitable treatment of all communities, and operate efficiently and transparently. And now I'll go through goal 1. It has 9 objectives. We have a strike-through version that you can see, so I'll try to just focus on the stuff that's changed. So there wasn't any change to objective 1. 2 had a change in the performance measurement, where we are saying now secure 300 million of new funding sources. And objective 3, we have changed to say AB 617 implementation in communities.
Sujata. Supervisor had a question.
Do you want questions as we go along or at the end?
I was, however you want it actually.
Okay, I had a question on number 2, the reduction from the 400 to 300 for the incentive funding sources. Did we meet our performance indicators for last year, and what was the reason for the reduction?
So the reduction is based on me not wanting to get my head banged up against the wall again. And I say that somewhat facetiously because the actual need, supervisor, is that we need anywhere from $1 to $2 billion a year. And the 400 million we knew was a stretch goal. We advocated very strongly during AB 617. This year, we're also advocating very strongly as well for enhanced funding, particularly when it comes to the GGRF funds. But having said that, we also recognize that this is a dashboard. And so we want to make sure that we can have a reasonable expectation, but that doesn't mean that we're not still shooting for the higher amount. It's just based on what we've really gotten thus far, but we still continue to go for the $1 to $2 billion a year at all aspects, whether it's state or federal.
Okay, so just setting a more realistic goal.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So objective 3, as I mentioned, we're just saying it's AB 617 implementation in communities now. And so the performance indicator has changed. It's now conduct air monitoring and implement community emission reduction plans in each of the 3 year 1 communities, and conduct outreach to develop recommendations for year 2 communities. And our performance measurement for this is going to be complete the development and begin implementation of the community emission reduction plans for each of the year 3 year 1 communities, and complete the first year of air monitoring for each of the 3 year 1 communities. And no change to item 4. And item 5, we just changed the performance measurement to say complete 100% of Title V inspections, because sometimes those numbers change, how many facilities are in Title V. And 6, we are also making a slight change to the performance measurement and saying applications at or near 3,000 instead of between 2,500 and 3,000. No change to 7. And we have added one new objective over here, priority objective, and that is for incentive programs. And we are saying % of grant money executed in contracts. And the measurement will be 50% of grant money contracted within 6 months after board approval.
Excuse me, Sujata. I'd like to just make a comment on item number 6. This really is an opportunity for us to declare victory in the sense that we are well ahead of the proposal to reduce our permit backlog. And we are sort of at the point now where we're seeing this is going to be the new baseline. And so here's again an opportunity where we're able to change the metric, recognizing that we've made a significant accomplishment. And I just want to make sure that people understand why we've changed this. When the permit backlog just a year and a half ago was over 7,000.
Wow.
You've obviously done a fantastic job with that. I think we've expressed it a number of times how impressed we are, and Lockheed's done just yeoman's work. So, and his entire team, I know.
Absolutely.
So, moving on to number 8 with the incentive programs and this focus for 50% within 6 months, are we starting to see some delay beyond where we would like, and that's why we're putting this metric in? And maybe if you can elaborate on that.
Councilman, so we advocated to put an incentive metric on the dashboard because we do have so many $250 million worth of projects that go through the grant program. So we wanted to reflect that in our performance. And we didn't have one per se, only raising the funds as opposed to executing the contracts. One thing that I'd like to amend that is rather than having it after board award, it's after we receive the funding from ARB, because ARB sometimes will withhold the actual check until we submit a project list. And so having the funding in-house is probably a better indicator of when the clock should start.
So what would the language read like then, Matt?
So we would say 50% grant money contracted within 6 months after receipt of funds.
And so, like, using Carl Moyer as an example, I mean, is that one of these that we're experiencing? So there's some delay with getting funding from CARB and then trying to execute contract, because normally it was the applications in July roughly, the time frame, and then we approved, I think this last one probably October, November, December, somewhere in that time frame.
And then once you approve it, ARB receives the official list, and then once they approve it, then they'll go through the DOF and get the check sent to us.
Okay, and is that delay starting to elongate in some way, or is it similar to years past?
So what we're seeing on the Carl Moyer, we're actually fine in terms of the program receipts. But on the 617 side, what we're seeing is a significant delay in receipt of funds. And the trouble is, as I mentioned earlier, we're going back to the legislature seeking additional funds. And the response, or the first response that they say to me is, have all the funds been spent? And if we're not getting the funds till late, and those funds aren't spent, then the legislature is of the opinion, well, we're not going to give you more money if the funds haven't been spent. So we're trying to accelerate the time from 2 aspects. One is the receipt of funds, and once we actually have the receipt of funds, that we can show that we're spending them. For us right now, we have a tremendous backlog. We're oversubscribed on these funds.
Sure.
So when you look at all the districts, the South Coast AQMD has no problem spending those funds. We need the funds more quickly, and we need to be able to demonstrate to the legislature that we're able to encumber those funds, move the projects, realize those air quality benefits. So this was a metric that tries to achieve and recognize that really no one's doing it better than we are once we have those funds.
It's a new program, so there's a little delay with CARB in trying to get funding through the process.
We're working through that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So going
Yes,
back,
Supervisor.
going back to item number, project priority objective number 6, what did you do differently to achieve the goals of the permit applications inventory reduction from 7,000 down to the lower figure of nearly 3,000?
We focused on it. We increased awareness. We changed the organization of that division. And as Councilman Robinson said, it was the leadership change. It was a recognition within the division itself that there was tremendous opportunity and that we could, and in fact, we did do much better. We did that by having metrics. So on a monthly basis, we were actually looking at the actual progress. It was something that we were reporting on, and we had these reports back to the governing board. It was a general recognition because this really was sort of an all-hands issue from the permitting backlog. We had members of the business community come to us saying that it's taking too long, we're losing opportunities. And so there was this tremendous focus really when I first came in. And here we are now. We changed that, I would say, within roughly. We started it in October of 2016, and Amir is here. He's our Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for Engineering, and they spent a lot of time. Some of it was through overtime, some of it was through cajoling, some of it was through begging. I mean, we did every single management technique to get it down, and we're now seeing a very leveling out of that. And rather than, and I will say our engineering team wanted to go even further, but we want to make sure that we're realistic. And I think that we're at that point where we're sort of at a stable baseline, and I don't want to continue to have these guys working overtime on the weekends and all those other things, but we think we have a manageable level. And plus, we anticipate future workload increases with Reclaim going through and all these other programs. So we think that we're at a good spot right now.
Okay, well, just congratulations to staff for having it as a priority, but also putting in processes in place and metrics and, goals and objectives and actually achieving them. It's really good.
Just a follow-up, do we have to hire, in terms of resources, how many additional, I remember going through this process, your feedback, people were almost getting burned up, but how many more resources did we add to it? 10 people, 20? How'd you do it?
When we started the process, we were at 26% vacancy rate, and we were able to bring it down to 8%.
So you brought more people aboard. Okay, great.
But we did not increase the total headcount for the division. They managed it within, but as Amir said, they had a huge vacancy rate. So we just put a lot of priority on getting those positions filled, and that helped a lot.
Great.
Objective 9 has been changed also. It says complete field study and begin data analysis for the 5th mates. And the measurement has been modified to say finalize data for fixed site monitoring at 10 sites, continue updating the emissions inventory, and complete deployment of 5 different advanced monitoring methods.
Where are the 10 sites, just curiously? In our 4-county region, have they been chosen already, or is there, and what's the criteria for choosing the 10 sites in the mates?
To answer your question, thank you for the question. These 10 fixed sites have been part of the MATES program since inception. Some of them have changed because due to lease losses and changes of locations, but it doesn't hurt the 4 county, and I can provide a map of all the 10 current stations.
Just generally, are they, because, this came to mind as a council meeting the other night in Baldwin Park, and the council members, we want some testing over by the 605 and 10 freeway, so many cars, my residents. I said, well, we've done close by, and Azusa is over here. And so how do you, again, things evolve. As people push out the Inland Empire, do we modify where we put these, or you say they're the same? Just give me an idea where you put them.
Sure. You have demonstrations over on the west side, so like Long Beach, we have one that's located near the 110, for example. We have our central downtown Los Angeles. One in Riverside, which is, I think, sorry, the Rubidoux site, there's been to that station, has every single piece of equipment possible. And you've got some in Anaheim, you've got one in Montana, you've got one in Lincoln Upland area.
Okay.
So we kind of cover the whole side of the
Councilman, this is specifically for MATES, right?
Mates, I know, you're talking about mates.
It's not-
Multiple air toxics, not the regular, not the other 42 monitors
It's
we
meant
have.
for the regional air toxins,
Okay.
to basically provide enough information for the modeling to do this assessment, to look at the regional distribution of air toxins and look at the trends between the different air toxins.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't hear, I couldn't hear very much of that. Did you mention at all the Coachella Valley and any of those 10 sites?
So there are, let me check to see which to confirm, which is the most easternmost site for MATES 5. And
You may have to talk louder so we can hear. Is there any device over there?
Yeah, it's hard to
Bring it
hear.
closer.
so the easternmost site is our site in Rubidoux, and we also have one on the inland valley of San Bernardino. Those are our 2 most easternmost sites.
Well, I would ask that we take another look at that. I think that's still pretty far from the Coachella Valley. And quite frankly, there was an article that just came out of the Desert Sun just this morning. We're getting calls from the LA Times regarding the concerns of the windfall that's coming from LA. Obviously, we have to address that. And I think it'd be important that one way we address that is by making sure that the Coachella Valley is also included as one of the sites here.
So thanks, Supervisor. The MACE program relies on the strength of having these sites, and we can look at the trends over the years. And when we look at the concentration of the sources, we know where a lot of those sources are. Coachella is unique in the sense that unfortunately it does receive the burden of a lot of the transport. It doesn't have a lot of sources from the toxics aspect. There are other programs that we can look at to see what we can do to augment and to address some of your concerns. But the MACE program in of itself is really designed to address some of the local ambient concerns. And what I would suggest is that we come up with some other ways to address the concerns that you've identified.
I can appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now, this is goal 2, and we have 4 objectives over here. There is no change to 1, but item 2, which is outreach, this entire objective was actually updated to reflect the direction of the board that we received on the April board meeting. And it talks about a number of large community outreach events conducted in each county and effective information distribution for major incidents. And so the performance measurement for this is conduct 4 large community outreach events, including 1 in each county, develop and implement SOPs to provide information to the public as quickly and accurately as possible. And the engage young persons objective was achieved this year. So we've taken it out for 1920.
Well, how was that achieved?
Yeah, so we formed a group and then we have the quarterly meetings, and that's what the objective was.
Can you describe the group and what they're doing?
Sure, so the group was formed based on some feedback that the board got and we got that the youth were not being listened to. So we decided to form this Young Leaders Advisory Group, and their goal is to give the perspective to the district of what they would like to see, but also two-way dialogue of what we're doing out there, so they have a better understanding of actually what we're doing. Because what we found was they weren't receiving all the information that we were actually doing.
You say youth, it's like, who's in your,
So it's folks between 18 and 30 years old.
okay,
So,
young adults.
yes, and they would make statements about the board members, right? And it's no one that represents us on the board, so.
Like the close one again.
And one more thing about that one, can we maybe reinsert in number 5, just a recommendation after last board meeting? With the chair's leadership, we approved the outreach to those 100 schools. I think we should put something about that's really a focus on the youth or the high school high school or school-age kids. That we really are putting a lot of effort in our I don't want to say youth movement, but when we approved last board meeting for the 100 schools or whatever it is in the 4 counties, to really put that program in over the next, 12 or 18 months, whatever it is.
12 months.
Okay, that's a big goal, and that's something we can measure and achieve.
We're actually going to go beyond that. We actually have a elementary school program too that was not, part of that program, but we're doing something not similar to that, but we're going out there and trying to educate the elementary school.
But that's a big outreach. It's something we've talked about, getting into schools and communities and neighborhoods and stuff like that, and we're putting our program out there and teaching it. Just a thought. Rick, I don't know if we can insert it or what the rest of the board wants to do, but it's something we can measure.
Let staff consider how we might be able to revise this and come back.
I agree with Michael 100% on that. It's, as a matter of fact, at the last admin, the budget is never concrete. I mean, the budget is always in flux. Last month, we had a item on admin for check before you burn, which was $250,000. And it just, the efficiency of that item was, to me, in grave question. So I asked them to to not fund it. And to maybe think about shift, because we're going to have to pay for these buses on the school program. And it's going to be a fortune. So I said, well, you know, why spend money, waste it on this when we could shift that over to school buses on a program that we know is effective. So I don't know if that ever got done or not. It was just a suggestion to Wayne. But this budget hangs like every budget at everybody's house. It's just a framework. And, you know, we move things around during the year in it so that we come out with no deficit, hopefully. It may be a little surplus, but these programs that we find that are effective, no matter where they are or who they impact, we should leave some latitude for them. And Sunjata is sitting there thinking, I wish this guy would shut up. That means I have to keep moving these little blocks around and make sure that they all come out even. But she's a master at that. She's a master at that.
I never think like that,
So-
Dr. Burke.
You're too kind. Okay. But anyway, I just want, Michael, I think you're right on target when you talk about things like that.
Thanks, Sheriff.
All right, goal 3, number 1 has no change. And number 2, we are changing the performance indicators slightly by saying materials will be available prior to the meeting. And then performance measurement, also we made a slight change to say available to public instead of 72 hours, 3 days prior to the meeting. Number 3, no change. Number 4, we have a slight change again to the performance measurement to say conduct 2 meetings of the permit streamline task force instead of 4. You know, we're doing well in that. And 5 has been taken out because it's fully completed, and no change to timely financial monitoring and implementation of Cloud Office Suite. So that's the end of goals and objectives. And any questions before I jump into the budget? So this is a summary of the general fund budget, and we're talking about the general fund today. We're comparing the fiscal year 18-19 budget to the 19-20 proposed budget. The revenue and expenditures for 18-19, it was a balanced budget at $162.6 million, and the proposed budget is also a balanced budget at $170.9 million. There were amendments made throughout the year in 18-19, and those are all board approved. And I'll get into the detail on the expenditures in this next slide. You can see that there are the broad categories of expenditures: salaries and benefits, services and supplies, capital outlays, transfers out. And in this, when you compare the adopted budget of 18-19 to 19-20, the main difference is in the salaries and benefits. That's gone up by $8.8 million. And that's because we added almost 63 positions. They were mostly added during the mid-year adjustment, and they are grant funded. So they are mostly AB 617 positions. Some are added for AB 134. So that's the difference you're seeing in the salaries and benefits. And you'll also see the difference in the revenue side when I'll show the revenue slide. Yes.
Regarding service and supplies, there was a spike of about 18% on the amended budget for 18-19, and then the adopted budget was 28.6, then went up to 34.3, and then proposed is 28.
Yes.
So can you explain the difference of why there was a spike?
Yes. So throughout the year, as Dr. Burke mentioned, it moves because board letters are brought to the board for their approval for purchase of things especially related to grants or federal grant funded stuff. So as the money comes in, those board letters will come to you for approval when we purchase those things. So we don't necessarily put it in the budget, but we only bring it and recognize the expenditure and the revenue simultaneously.
Okay.
Thank you. And the fiscal year 18-19 budget, as I mentioned, had 876.4 positions, and the 19-20 will have 939 positions. And in this next slide, we're talking about proposed staffing changes. This looks like a very busy slide. I'll just summarize it really quickly. We added two, so the net add is 1 position. And we added 2 positions in the Legislative and Public Affairs Division. One was for a program supervisor, and the other one was for admin secretary. We're deleting the Chief Administrative Officer position. And so there is sort of a reclass of the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer positions, in 3 of them in the Finance Division, AHR and IM, to be Deputy Executive Officers in those same divisions. And then we downgraded 2 positions in for principal office assistants to supervising office assistants. And there's 1 title change for our health effects officer to be Director of Community Air Programs / Health Effects Officer. This next slide is showing expenditures by activity. And basically, just wanted to point out that the core activities, which are compliance, permitting, and monitoring, they use 64% of the general fund budget. And the rest, if you add in advanced technology, rulemaking, and program, that's another 23%. So almost 87% go towards these activities, and 13% go towards policy, operations, and customer service. So this is a revenue comparison, and you will see a similar jump as I'll go through it. The emission fees, annual renewal fees, and permit fees, those are our stationary source fees, and they make up almost 60%. They provide almost 60% of the revenue to our budget. You will see a difference between the 18-19 budget and the 19-20 budget of, if you add them, those 3 categories in 18-19 were 97 million, and they're 101 million approximately in the 19-20. And that's because we have a CPI increase of 3.5% for those fees, and also the last year of Title V fee increases that the board approved June 2017. And so then the other category that has a change, as I mentioned, is approximately $8 million in the other category, and that's where you have the grants such as AB 617 going up compared to the last grant. The last grant was a $10.8 million grant, and this is going to be higher. Then we have some administrative costs that we'll be pulling in for BW grant. 1180 rule will get some administrative cost, and also the emission reduction projects that we did, we'll pull some administrative cost over there. This next slide, oops, sorry, I jumped 1 slide. Go back. We're missing 1. No, I think there was supposed to be another one. For revenues and expenditures uncertainties, I'll just talk to it. We have some revenue and expenditure uncertainties that relate to federal funding. This is because of the political environment, the EPA grant, and then the AB 617 ongoing funding. And penalties and settlements, we budget at $5 million, but those are always uncertainties. And then retirement cost, it did go up slightly this time, but then we know that if SB Sarah changes their investment rate of return, currently it's at 7.25, and if it gets lowered, which probably is going to be the direction, because we see that in many other plans like CalPERS, et cetera, moving it down to 7, it will increase our contributions. So we have our eye on that. This is a 5-year projection, and the governing board's policy is to keep the reserves at 20% of revenue. And you can see in the first 3 years at least, we are at or above 20%, and then we do go down. And in this projection, we have already included CPI increases at 3.5%. We have our last year of Title V fee increase that's showing in the 1920 and not beyond that. We have retirement cost increases that we have factored in, and the salary increases that the governing board gave for 1920 and 2021, and it started in 1890.
Can you explain the drawdown on reserves?
So the draw on the reserves going down is basically, we have some major building costs that are coming up that have been pushed in the out years. And, we would like to, maybe if we have some surplus, put some money away for those kind of costs, and that this will look a little different. We can put it in our infrastructure fund, but otherwise it will come out of the general fund, and they're being reflected in the out years.
Okay.
And if I might, what are those?
The building costs, Mayor McAllen.
Roof. The roof is an example. This rainy season, we had a number of leaks in the building, and it's very costly to do. So that's an example where now that we're moving into spring and summer, we can put it off, hopefully. But the roof is one example. I think we're also looking at
air handlers. Those are one of the most expensive items, the air handlers and scrubbers, chillers.
Done some of the elevators, but we know that there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done with regards to that, as well as the power and all of the electrical infrastructure that goes with that.
That's right.
When was this building built?
About
25?
27 years ago.
So there's been no real remodeling since it was built there.
But we know that the elevators need money, $1.7 million. That's actually it's going to show up in the 1920, depend on the timing. Either it'll have to come out of the reserves right now in the 1819 or 1920. So those are the kind of things that we see, and we think that we need to set some money aside.
Sujata, I think you can also speak to the reserves and how we manage that by looking forward.
Yes.
And what our record on that is.
Yes, so Supervisor, we did analysis of, a look back of, say, when 1819 was the 5th year, out. How did we say, what would be the balance and where we are at? So we manage the 5th year pretty well, because our actuals, when they come out, they reflect that we are a little bit higher. But it's because of two reasons. One is, of course, moving some of these very expensive infrastructures out, and the other one is the penalty money. We budget at $5 million, but average, has been about $9 million. So if that happens, then, our reserve looks okay.
So can you share with them, Sujata, when you looked back and said, we thought we were going to be X% in this year, and we're currently at 30, what was that value? Because it was in the low to mid-teens.
So it's usually the difference is about anywhere from 7 to 10% difference. And like I said, it's because of that reason.
But I think what we really do is we look at the numbers, we manage them, and even though on a 5-year projection, which is relatively far out, our actuals show that we're doing much better than that. So we keep an eye on it. We don't ever anticipate to get there, but that's what it shows. But that's why we keep such a close eye on the budget, so that we can keep it to 20% that's been established by the board.
I can attest to that in my 3.5 years here. My first year, I was pretty concerned about the 5-year outlook and where we're at today compared to what we were looking at 3.5 years out the last time. What you said, we're staying on track.
Just a question, and I was looking at this at our city budget and our returns on the investments. It's on the investment committee. I remember, was it just as soon as a year and a half ago, we were looking at like 0.001 interest? But now I think I was like 2.01?
2.2, yes, we're at 2.5. Yeah, the LA County's investment returns are at 2.5. 2.5.
The other counties are doing pretty well too. So I know we've got money sitting there, millions of dollars. When you add that in over a year, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars and multi-millions maybe, right?
Yes, so in our, one of the differences that you were seeing in that other category of revenue, it is interest. We have, put in a more realistic interest revenue.
Okay,
So we bumped that up by about 700,000
okay. that
because of
helps.
the increasing rate. But the interest rate might be
Flattened out, it looks like,
Yes,
okay.
it might be flattening out. All right, with that, I am done with the budget summary, and I will take any questions or pass it on to Dr. Pine, who will do a presentation of the proposed amendments to Reg 3.
So thanks, Sujata. So every year that where we bring the budget, we generally bring our Regulation 3 to the board for amendment. That is our fee rule. It's made up, our fee regulation. It's made up of several rules. So this year we're doing the same. So there's several things we're doing within the set of fee rules. One is the automatic CPI based fee increase. This was something that was approved by the board several years ago. So just implementing that by changing all the tables and numbers within Reg 3. We have 5 proposals that involve either new fees or fee increases. Probably the most impactful is this toxic emissions fee, which I'm going to spend some time on after this slide. Then there's 4 other minor fee adjustments. We have 6 changes that actually provide some fee reduction or fee relief. And then there's 4 changes that really have no fee impact. They're more administrative changes. They're adding clarifications and to some of the definitions. And one of those includes our Rule 209 in terms of the definition of a change of owner or operator. So the most significant change is our toxic emission fees. So there's kind of 2 key issues that we're trying to address by this proposal. There has been significant recent and current and anticipated upcoming district efforts in terms of toxic emissions from stationary sources. And there's lots of examples of this. The board members are aware of the work we did in Paramount, the monitoring work we did in Paramount, the enforcement work, and then the work that comes from that when we amend our toxic rules or come up with new toxic rules to actually control those types of emissions throughout the basin. We've noticed some, there's some information on fugitive emissions, not only from metal working facilities, but...
If I could ask, Phil, if you could just do a really brief summary on the work in Paramount. Supervisor Bartlett wasn't here during any of that. And I'm
Right.
not sure if you're aware of those, if that would be okay.
Yeah, so 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, we were working in the city of Paramount and had some town hall meetings there. There was a long history of odor complaints and concerns about a set of facilities that were doing a lot of metal working, whether they were forging facilities or metal platers or heat treating. And after we were receiving a lot of complaints, we had some toxics monitors there that were showing some moderately elevated levels, but we can never really track them back to their source. So we developed a technology where we could put out many more monitors, actually hang them on like street lights or telephone poles, these portable small monitors, and do a lot more monitoring, a lot more quickly in a lot of different locations. And we're able to very quickly narrow in on the source of what was hexavalent chromium emissions. And hexavalent chromium is one of the most toxic toxics we have on a per pound basis. And we actually found some very, very high levels right outside a couple facilities. So this led to additional monitoring, additional investigation, interagency collaboration, an incredible amount of outreach and communication, enforcement action, hearing board action, and a whole series of rules that we've either already adopted or are working on to make sure that what we found at these facilities stops and it doesn't occur anywhere in the basin.
And legislation, I would add.
And legislation.
So it covered the whole gamut of anything that could be done was done.
So in many ways that led to some of the upcoming work. The AB 617 program, one could say, was sort of based on some of the work that we had done in Paramount, and the legislature had seen how that came about, and they wanted to formalize that and kind of spread it throughout the state. So we have additional work from AB 617. There's been changes to the health risk assessment guidance that make some of these toxics in the calculation more potent. Therefore, that leads to more rule work, more enforcement work. So there's a lot of accelerated air toxics activity, as opposed to criteria pollutant activity, which has kind of been what we've been working on steadily over the many years. The other thing is when we look at where we're collecting our toxics fees, right now facilities report their toxics emissions either on a quadrennial basis or an annual basis, and they do pay fees based on the mass of emissions they emit. But we've found that it's a very antiquated table, doesn't take into account some of the updates that have occurred over the past couple of decades, and it really doesn't correlate as well with the work that's upcoming. That's why we're proposing to make these changes. So we wanted to make it more correlated to the complexity of the facility reports and thus the auditing of the facility, and more the toxicity of the emissions that lead to all the additional work that I had just talked about. So on the right, you see currently we collect about 500 million in toxics emissions fee revenues per year.
500 million?
Sujata got excited.
We got the roof money.
$500,000 in toxic fee revenues. And we do collect, we collect reports on criteria pollutant emissions as well. We collect about 20 million for that, but only 500,000 for toxics fees. And we looked at all the upcoming activities of the district that are eligible to be supported by toxics emission fees. It actually adds up to $20 million just for toxics, and that includes some of the upcoming AB 617 work, which we've been fortunate enough to receive some funding from the legislature, not enough to cover the whole program, but it's been on a year-by-year basis. We have no guarantee that's going to continue into the future. So part of what we're proposing is starting to recover some of those costs that we know are going to be upcoming. So the proposal to better align, again, revenue with the workload, as well as this upcoming work that's anticipated, is a three-tiered toxics emission fee. Right now, it's essentially you just pay per mass of emissions based on the toxic you're emitting. So we're proposing a base toxics fee. So anyone who reports to our system, regardless of the amount of toxics you're emitting, will pay a flat fee of $78. That is intended to support just the operation of the software and maintaining that software to maintain the system and have them in that database. That's just a nominal fee. It's important because the California Air Resources Board is working on a big revision of the statewide requirements for reporting toxics from stationary sources, which could result in a lot more work for us and a lot more facilities reporting, even if their emissions are very low. So we do want to get some cost recovery for that extra work, even for facilities that have some very low emissions. The second one is a flat fee per device. So when we looked at our activities, we know that we spend a lot more time auditing and reviewing the toxics emission reports from more complicated facilities, and the best surrogate for that was a number of devices. So that's the second fee. That's intended to support the work of the emissions reporting team that does this auditing and review of the reports. And the final tier would be a cancer potency weighted fee based on the toxicity of the emissions being reported. Essentially that potency multiplied by the mass of emissions. And this tier would go to support all the work that comes out of learning of a toxic issue through these reports that goes into enforcement, goes into rulemaking and many other aspects of what the district works on.
Philip?
Yes.
So going from 500,000 to 4.9 million is great because it's getting towards more cost recovery, but it's still shy of the $20 million that is full cost recovery. So what proposals do you have over time to get you up to the full cost recovery? And as we move towards that, instead of fee increases, can you call it subsidy reduction?
That's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
We do that in the county.
So we are mindful of impacts to facilities, so we will talk about that. We're still hopeful that we get as much cost recovery as we can from the state legislature who mandated this program, and we continue to do that. We're also committing to come back and look at the revenue versus the expenditures in light of what we might or might not be getting from the state legislature to make adjustments as we go forward. So it's just the beginning of a process. I think ultimately the goal is always to have full cost recovery. But again, there's a couple uncertainties going forward, again, with the legislative funding, with what California Resources Board is doing, as well as I'll talk about in a moment, some refinement of some of the emissions that actually do get reported once these fees are implemented. So several uncertainties, but we are going to commit to come back and look at that. So it 4.9 million in total revenue from the 500,000 that we're collecting now. It is an order of magnitude increase, but I will mention in terms of total emission fees, it represents about a 20. When you include criteria pollutants, it represents about a 20% increase. So we, again, are mindful of impacts. We're mindful that this coming year is the final year of the permit fee increase. So rather than implement right away, so that right away would mean paying in 2020 for the 2019 emission reporting year, we're proposing to delay it until 2021 for the 2020 reporting year. This has several advantages. One is because the fees are relatively low now, the data that's reported generally doesn't have as much care when a facility reports that data. There's not a lot of fee impact, so they use default factors. There's nothing driving them to pay for a source test to get more accurate because the fee implications are quite low. So this will give them time in the year between this and when they would actually have to report, which would be 2020 reporting year, to do some refinement of the reports and to take a closer look and to maybe do some source tests to get more accurate data, but also to actually save money in the long run because those source tests may be less expensive than actually paying the fee that would be incurred under some default emission factor that may be actually higher than their actual emissions. So there's an advantage there to delaying a year to give people time to see what the new structure is, see what the fee impact may be, and then make some whatever adjustments they need to make. So that's why we propose phasing it in. Nothing in the first year. The second year would impose the flat fee for being in the system, but then 50% of the increase, and then finally in 2022 the final 50% of the increase on the other two. And again, under statute we have to phase in these increases over 2 years.
So question.
Yes, sir.
So in addition to the revenue side of things, getting greater revenues to get up to cost recovery, have you done anything to look internally to see if there's anything you can do to reduce the cost of providing services? Because that kind of dovetails into the whole financial picture.
I don't know if Wayne wants to address that. I mean, we've been in the area of air toxics, it's only been increasing in recent years, and it's been very intensely increasing in recent years. So I don't know if you want to talk about other efficiencies.
I know, I'm sure it's like very
district.
labor intensive.
Yeah.
Well, when we look at the number of personnel that are assigned to it, that number is relatively low overall. And this area has been one of those that hasn't had our full attention. But given all the things that have gone on over the last 2 years, we're trying to enhance not only our internal capabilities, but to expand, I think in part, because we were so successful in Paramount by throwing resources at it. That's where a lot of the funding that we've gotten, whether it be 134, it's not only getting the additional resources to do the monitoring, analytical deployment, it's having the ability to have the people on board to do the analysis.
Right.
It goes out, and Matt, maybe you can add to that as well.
I want to add that we are looking at advanced technologies, so optical remote sensing and other types of real-time measurements that would help offset some of these more expensive filter-based methods for collecting air toxics. So
Okay.
we're investigating as part of our MATES program, as part of AB 617, and part of Rule 180 to see if there's ways where we can reduce those costs, because just in Paramount alone, it was like $3 million to do that widespread monitoring.
Right.
So heavy.
Okay. Great. So as technology advances, utilizing greater levels of technology to help reduce the cost of providing services is a good thing.
So, slide. So just a final bullet point here is what I mentioned earlier, that we will commit to come back and revisit this fee. There are some uncertainties. That's one reason to delay a year before implementation. There is a reason to adopt this year and give facilities time to see what's coming. If we delayed a year for adoption, then we'd be back here next year without a lot of time for facilities to adjust. So that's why we think it's a good idea to adopt this year, but have the implementation date be the following year. But we will come back and revisit that. So we've done a lot of work to see what these actual impacts are. And you can see here on the pie chart on the left, there's about 40% of the facilities that will really see, no difference or even a slight fee reduction. And then another fraction that might have a fee increase, maybe less than $1,000 per year, on the order of like 30%. And then there's about 30% of facilities that will see fee increases over $1,000. We've tried to do a lot of outreach to let people know this is coming. We've already had a couple public meetings on this. The attendance hasn't been great. We've done our regular public notice. We've sent out targeted emails to all the facilities that are going to be affected. And just very recently, we looked at the top 150 facilities, essentially over $5,000 potential fee increase, and we specifically asked them to call us and we'll tell you exactly what this might mean for you. So we've been trying to do that targeted outreach to make sure everyone's aware. So on the right here, we've broken it down by the sector. So obviously the larger, more complicated facilities are going to have the largest fee impact. Like obviously refineries are on top. You can see the average difference, and then on the right is the maximum difference. So that's the one facility with the maximum fee impact. And some of those may drop, again, as that issue I mentioned, that they might be using a default emission factor for toxics, and when they can dig in and maybe do a source test or refine their reporting, some of those may still drop. We've received some feedback from stakeholders. There definitely is some recognition of the revenue need in this area, given all the new work coming online. We've been asked to kind of expand this chart on the right to provide more detail on where the projected increases would be, the impacts on more refined source categories. We're working on that now, and we'll get that out to the stakeholders potentially in the next, by early next week at the latest. But also some requests on more categorized expenses of where, how we came up with that other bar chart here of where the expenses are in which areas. So we're working on more detail there. We have had requests for more time. Most of them have been just another month to take a look at this. This doesn't necessarily have to be adopted in May. It could go to June if people needed more time. Typically, we try to bring it with the budget. I think this revenue is not included in the budget at this point. So if needed, or if the board so directed, we could take another month if needed. But we are doing a lot of outreach to make sure everyone's aware. So if you just look at the total fee impacts of the changes we're proposing, obviously that top line there, that toxic air contaminant fee is the biggest impact. But all the changes not all the changes, some of the changes have some pluses and minuses there. Some of them have no fee impact. So you can see here what the 3-year changes would be if our proposal was adopted. So I think I'll turn it back over to.
Got a question?
Yeah, sorry.
So when you have 2022 and thereafter, do you have any potential estimates on the thereafter? It's not going to be status quo of what you have here.
In terms of this fee increase, that would be the final year of implementation. So if no other changes were made, those fees would stay in place. And these numbers, the projected revenue, is based on 2017 toxic emissions reporting. We've made no attempt to try to project whether that's going to increase or decrease. It is usually they drop to some degree as rules get adopted. But this is just based if toxic emissions stayed the same as they were in 2017.
Great, thank you.
Something that bothers me is that we can find a way to communicate to a targeted group about a fee increase, but we can't find a way. You got to communicate with people whose lives are at risk by emissions. There's something wrong with this story here. Okay, didn't mean to draw you into this fight, Phil, but you just stepped in it by accident. Can we move along? We're gonna lose some of our people here in a minute.
And so we just want to conclude with the summary of key dates for our budget process. March 15th, the socio-economic impact analysis is available for public review and comments, and those are related to Rule 320 CPI increase. And so early April, the draft 1920 budget work program is available for public review. And then April 5th, we had a budget advisory committee, and then April 9th, we had our public consultation meeting at which the proposed budget was presented, the CPI fee increases and the proposed amendments to Rec 3 fees were discussed. And then today we are at the governing board workshop and discussing these same things, the proposed budget and proposed amendments to Rec 3 fees and CPI increase. And the comments that were provided at the budget advisory committee and the public consultation meeting, they will be provided to the board today. And also, I just want to point out that there were no comments related to the CPIP increases. And then we will take it to full board adoption on May 3rd. I'm happy to answer questions.
And Mr. Chair, I have 3 public comment cards on this item on the agenda.
I think you said, okay, no problem.
We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I think so.
No problem. You want to call him up, Ben?
Will do. Kurt Coleman.
Mayor Benoit, I just wanted to point out that since this is a special governing board meeting, that there's no general public comment. The only public comment would be on this specific item.
Okay.
So if somebody was waiting to do general public comment, they should do it here.
This looks like I've got all comments on this item, so we're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Kurt Coleman, here today on behalf of the Southern California Air Quality Alliance. I know for more years than I can remember, I've been coming to all these budget workshops and saying we need a priority to reduce the backlog. Well, we've done that, and we thank you, and we congratulate Wayne and Lockie and Amir and their entire permitting staff for all the work that they've done to do that. Of course, I can't let it just go at that, so there's a new priority. No, you can't.
I think your time's up, Kurt. I think your time's up, Kurt.
We think that the
Thank you for your testimony.
The source test review process is taking much longer than we think it should. I know companies that wait months, sometimes years even, to have a source test reviewed and approved. And it's become really critical now with this air toxics fee increase. It's going to be, a lot of source testing will be required to be done to establish emission factors different than the default factors, hopefully lower. I think there are a couple things here. We would like the staff and Wayne to take this seriously and see what we can do. I know the source testing manager position is open. I think to a large extent, to some extent it may be resource related, but to another extent I think it's management related. And to light a fire and get these source test results reviewed more quickly. The second thing is, as I said, this is very critical for these companies who are going to be hit with this air toxics fee. I think they ought to be given the right to decide what they should be testing for. I've heard some anecdotes that when they go in and say, we want to test for this, the staff says, oh, that's great, but you also should be testing for this and this and this, and it drives the cost of the test way to the roof. And finally, we would ask that the source test, the emission, air toxics emission fee be phased in over 3 years. You can see some facilities are getting hit with 6-figure increases potentially. And this will allow them the time to get the testing done and the results in before they get clobbered by that last big increase. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony,
Carl.
especially the first part.
Carl?
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. I'm Carl Laney with Montrose Environmental Solutions. We're a consulting firm, an emissions testing firm. We work with a variety of facility operators in the basin, both in the private sector and the public sector. I'm here today. I think Dr. Phil really did speak to some of the concerns we have about the proposed toxics fee. I think I would like to just touch upon a couple of those, but I think one of the big differences between what Dr. Fine is suggesting and what I'm suggesting is that he's recognizing that outreach is needed. There will be a phase-in of the toxics rule. However, coming from the regulated community, I know that most of the community clearly isn't aware of this. The rule amendments that are being proposed this year go well beyond what they normally expect. The implementation of AB 617 pulls in even more facility operators who know nothing about the fee program. I think the debate, the discussion, and the outreach has to occur before board adoption of the rule. And that's one of the things I'm asking for. Source testing is needed. Source testing is expensive. We applied the proposed toxics fees to several of our facilities that we work with. One facility we applied, if we used the reference value factors that we know were wrong, so many of them are wrong, so many reference value factors have not been updated in over 25 years. They do not reflect the technologies that you're permitting. If we applied these factors to one example facility, our cost would be $180,000. To conduct tests to hit the most likely culprit of bad information was a $30,000 test. That would bring the perceived cost of the fees down to about $30,000. But to take care of the rest of those factors, those reference factors that we know are incorrect, we would have to spend another $50,000 on testing. We've also looked at other sources, combustion sources of formaldehyde. We know that those emission factors are also overstated. To do the testing, it would be hard for a single facility to economically justify it. So we do want to have discussions with the district about being able to pool data from the private sector and understand what the district can and is willing to do with that data that is voluntarily provided by the private sector once the district has access to it. I think that's going to be very critical as we go forward if in fact we have to clean up reference value or counter reference values in this program. Finally, a large portion of the fees would be paid for operators of emergency equipment. The people who operate emergency equipment have missions like yours to protect and save life. They do it differently through infrastructure development and maintenance or through providing services. I would like for us to have more discussion about whether or not these toxics fees should be applied to those people. We do take actions constantly to find alternatives to diesel engines, but sometimes diesel engines are what we need. We take actions to minimize our testing operations, but we still need the diesel engines, and we would still be hit hard with these fees.
Thank you. Thank you. Staff, have any comments back to that? Or want to circle back later?
On the final one, about the diesel engine?
Yeah.
And that's, I know. So how much do we calculate roughly what a typical diesel backup at 20 hours? Estimated rough idea after we get that.
We'll have to get back to that. We have it. And on the reference value comment?
Yeah, so that gets back to these, these emission factors that are, again, admittedly out of date. They could still be eligible to be used, but we're willing to work with industry over the next now year and a half to gather all that data, and potentially we could change based on the, it doesn't mean every facility has to test. Eventually, if there's enough tests out there and if they're consistent, we can update our default factors for everybody.
Phil, and is there an opportunity to work with the state on some of those? And so I think we'd like to explore that a little bit more
Okay.
before we make, because I think that if we get the state, we can certainly evaluate what was considered. And back to the board with some thoughts on that.
Another source of uncertainty here is that the state is about to adopt, or they adopted, and they're about to finalize a toxic emissions reporting regulation. And we don't know for sure, but anticipate that they're going to want to meet that through as well. So that's another source of uncertainty, is that also in the future there may be some CARB-related fees related to this same type of reporting.
Thank you. Two more speakers. I did not forget about you tonight, don't worry. Come on up and then have Harvey Utter after this.
Okay, excellent. Hi, good afternoon, Chair Burke and members of the board. I'm Janet Whittick. I'm here with SEED, the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. And I can be relatively quick because I think we support everything that has been said by Carl and Kurt. But I will just go over and highlight a few of those points. One, I would say that I attended the first workshop and attended the second via phone, was very shocked that nobody was there given the significance of this fee increase. So I think it does make sense if we can extend out the rulemaking to really be sure that people understand these changes and can participate and provide you feedback. We would strongly support that. We also would like the board to consider doing a 3-year phase-in. We're in the final year of pretty significant Title V increases. Those have been 10%, more than 10% per year for the last 3 years. And we also think that there will be some additional permitting costs related to the sunset of reclaim. And so a lot of those facilities are also the ones who will be most impacted by the toxic fee increase. And we just want to kind of see how it all fits together. I think Kurt and Carl again spoke very well on the great need for the source testing. We really want to be sure that staff has the capacity and the resources to do that in a timely fashion to support this rule implementation. And we also support, whenever feasible, looking at pool testing results to try to get better efficiency and reduce somewhat some of the administrative cost and burden. I think to that end, and especially the discussion just now on the emission factors, it may make sense perhaps to bring together a technical working group of stakeholders who can really dig into that. And I think that that's the work being done here, I would hope, can also feed up to what's happening at the state level in terms of the criterion toxics reporting reg. I think universally, the district here can do a great job in pushing all of the data forward and really making some improvements. And finally, I just really appreciate staff's preparedness and willingness to talk individually with facilities and to be reaching out to folks to help them understand what is driving, the significant cost increases in terms of the toxics emissions permit. And we're also reviewing this in terms of the budget to try to figure out what is driving this big cost recovery gap. So we look forward to further conversations with the district on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Etter?
Good afternoon. I'm Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition and the 90% of citizens, voters that would like to see an equitable, just solar transition as soon as possible. In reference to the mission statement and the goals, what we put, it says to clean the air and protect the health of residents of South Coast District through practical and innovative strategies. We put before you 3 years ago and before the Solar New Deal. So this is in the record, and we think this should be stated outright that we need an equitable, just solar transition, and it's reflected in the goals that not only achieve clean air standards to specify that it's for criteria, for toxics, and for greenhouse gases, carbon equivalents for climate change. There's been inconsistencies in senior people, staff people, in planning that say that greenhouse gases are not part of the the duties and obligations of this entity. So public education, number 2, that's good. Ensure equitable and just, we have to include just, treatment for all, not only communities, individuals and communities. And operate efficiently and transparently in implementing the just solar transition.
I don't want that.
We got a bird in the room? Anyway. So this has to, what I've just outlined has to be specified and outlined in the specific priority goals and objectives throughout this document. Wish we'd attended earlier meetings anyway. So everything the district does, the 900 staff people, all the rules and processes has to be looked at and in detail how things will change or be augmented to facilitate an equitable, just solar transition as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Nastri, do you have anything further?
I think we can seek your guidance with regards to bringing this forward, the governing board in May or June. Dr. Fine had talked about the opportunity for some additional outreach. We don't necessarily have to go before May, but we could do it in June. So certainly would like some feedback. And Dr. Fine?
I just wanted to mention that 2 of the commenters, or maybe all 3, asked for a 3-year phase-in. Technically, This is a 3-year phase-in. It's just instead of a third, it's 0, 50, and 50, more or less.
I'm hearing chatter behind me, but okay.
Well, maybe we should make it a third first instead of 0.
That's what they want.
And let me just clarify that the portions that we were talking about, the additional outreach, the toxics aspects, that's what we could bring back in June. We would still like to move ahead with the budget in May.
Okay.
And probably all the other fee changes.
And all
as
the
well.
other fees.
But it's up to the board whether they want to consider this a May or June.
Just, he said it, I guess, at the meeting, somebody said that there was nobody there. Is it because people are just too busy doing their taxes or getting these emails or just ignoring them? Because
I mean, we have emails from most of the facilities within the toxics program. We did send direct emails. We are getting a lot of individual feedback and questions, more so than the workshops that we had. So people might be busy to show up at a workshop and drive here, but we are getting phone calls. We are answering questions.
Is there the opportunity to do like a webinar instead of a workshop where, because I think that not having them engaged, we're just going to have problems on the back end once a fee gets implemented, a year from now, the first phase, it's going to come unglued.
So they'll be at the board meeting in Mass.
There could be, right? So
I love the webinar idea.
Yeah.
And
I love that idea.
And then, beyond that, I think that the stakeholders, the trade associations that are involved now, they need to be a part of this too. They need to help us with, that outreach. And I know that a lot of times they're probably hesitant to do that because they may not like the fee increases at all. But, if something's going to come, I think that we need to be working with them to try to get them to engage their communities. So just use them as a force multiplier for us.
And are those workshops broadcast on the web at all or no?
Or conference call.
Just a conference call.
We typically don't do workshops, web broadcasts, just because of some of the cost aspects. But we're actually looking at, I've asked Ron to look into how we can better utilize our resources. So for instance, Zoom is one of the things that we're talking about. And so we're actually looking into that, and we'll be able to get back to you on how that, but I think that's where we have to move, is to having that type of capability to reach out to those people.
Yeah.
So we're going there.
So in the last workshop we had a conference call. There were 38 people calling in, which is not a bad number.
Okay.
It's 4 stakeholders in the room, but 38.
Okay. That's good. That makes sense.
Okay.
Does that conclude the business? of the day?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Have a nice weekend.
You too.